Yo. Well, hello. This is going to be a quick tutorial. Sorry about that. This is going to be a quick tutorial about Zbrush, and the whole purpose is to make it a very simple, very kind of intro level, nevertheless very powerful way to just get into Zbrush, and mostly for people that are not necessarily like hardcore 3D artists, or people with a lot of experience with 3D. This approach won't be very technical. I won't get into the very technical details, but I will try to make it powerful enough so that anybody can jump into it and start sculpting something cool. And I'm gonna go for this little kaiju toy that I found on the web from Ultraman. And the reason why I picked this guy is because I'm not gonna try to do anything too anatomically correct. I think sculpting anatomy is a skill on its own, and this is not really about that. This is more about just sculpting whatever, especially something kind of surreal and abstract, something without a whole lot of familiar shapes, only because the only focus is exploring the sculpting tools and some of the techniques to get us there quick. So I'm gonna get started, but I do want to say something that is a little bit of on the technical 3D side, and that is that less is more in terms of polygons. And I wanna make that clear from the get-go, because in Zbrush it's very easy to get very crazy with subdividing geometry very quickly and sculpting detailed things very fast. But I guess as I go along, I'm gonna show why that isn't the greatest idea sometimes, especially if you want to have a lot of freedom while sculpting. Anyway, so as I do this, I'm gonna mention what keys I'm hitting and what's the name of the tools, and I'm gonna try to keep it to very little, just a small selection of tools, so that, because there's like a million tools and a million things, so I don't want to like try to cover too much, and you can do a lot with a very little in this program. So first things first, I'm gonna drop just a cube in the viewport, and in order to do this, you go here to the tools section and you look for cube 3D, and I'm just gonna pick that guy, and I'm just gonna click and drag and drop, and that drops it into the viewport. And then you have to hit this button called edit here, otherwise you're gonna keep dropping cubes and it's kind of annoying. So just go ahead and click edit, and now that you're in edit mode, you can click around the viewport and you can see that your cube is there, and you can look at it and do anything you want. Wait a second. So here's my cube, and this is what I'm gonna start my sculpt based on this. So I reason why I picked the cube is I just want to go with the simplest thing that exists. And this is also kind of harkening back to the days of box modeling from 3D, if you have any familiarity with that. And I want to show you guys the wireframe of this cube. If you come here on the left, on the right bottom side of the viewport, there's this line fill. And actually you can see that this cube is subdivided quite a bit, and it has like a weird shape here at the top with the triangles and all that. It's not the best, but nevertheless it doesn't matter too much. I just wanted to show that. And the other thing that is very important here, and it's super powerful, and always keep in mind, especially if we're gonna sculpt something like this little guy that I chose, go to transform and activate your symmetry, and by default it's on the X, and that's normally all you need. And as you can see here with the cursor, you can see that it's highlighting both sides, so that means that it's now gonna sculpt symmetrically. Whatever I do on one side is going to be done to the other side, and that's what we want. So I'm going to start with just the most basic tool, and to access the tools very quickly you just press F2, and I'm just going to, if you just look for it, it's called standard. It's like the most standard tool, I guess. Where is it? I guess it's not called standard, but I'm so used to this that if you press S, and then I guess just ST. Give me a second. Some technical difficulties. Standard. Oh, ST. Sorry about that. So yeah, it's called standard. And it basically is just, I forgot about that. Once you drop your box, you have to make it polymesh 3D, because otherwise you can't sculpt on it. That's a pretty obvious step, and the program will remind you of it. So just go ahead and click polymesh 3D, and now I can sculpt on it. And as you can see, I'm just pressing on the box, and it's starting to bulge out. And basically this standard is I'm gonna subdivide a little bit real quick just to show the effect better. It's almost like your regular brush in Photoshop, where it just it doesn't have a whole lot of features or anything. It basically follows the if you look at the cursor, it follows the draw size and the focal shift. If I change the focal shift with O, and I sculpt again, you can totally see that it changed the way it bulges out. So it's basically your very standard Photoshop-like brush. And to get started, all we have to worry about is using that brush for a bit. And I just want to show that how far you can take something without having to worry about using too many tools or too many brushes. And I guess I'm gonna try to like sculpt the body, the torso of this guy a little bit. Imagining this, the top of this box is where that neck piece connects, and then the head. So I'm gonna soften this out a little bit, and I'm not gonna worry about what would be the arms, and I'll explain why in a bit. And by the way, the other tool that you're going to be using a lot, it's smoothing, and you can access this by default by just pressing Shift. So Shift, and it's already smoothing, and it already is. It no longer really looks like a box because I've smoothed out all the hard edges, and it's starting to look like something round and different. And again, I'm going to go back to standard, and if you think about it, what it does, it just makes things bulge out. So if I wanted to increase sort of the length of this piece to mimic the torso a little bit more, I could easily start doing that here. And in a way, I'm using this tool with a purpose that might not be its most ideal use, and I'll show you why in a bit. But still, I still want to show that if you think about its like bulging out characteristics, it can kind of do a lot. So now it's starting to become a little bit more of an elongated shape, and that's what I'm looking for the torso. And again, I smooth it out a little bit, and that was quite too much probably right there. And the smoothing will be very influenced by the amount of geometry that it's touching. So as you can see, there's not a whole lot of geometry here. You can see all the facets of the polygons. So if I smooth, it does like a lot. The smoothing is very reliant on how much geometry you have there. So just remember that, because you can actually like use that to your advantage in some cases. Because if I had too many subdivisions and a lot of geometry here, when I smooth, as you can see, I'm smoothing here as much as I can, just as before, and it barely seems like it's doing anything, and that's because now it's trying to smooth out way more polygons. So I'm gonna undo all that. I'm gonna go back to where I was and delete the higher. Here in the subdivisions, you can delete all the higher subdivisions that you create. So I'm back to where I was, and I'm gonna leave it there for now with the standard tool. And now I'm gonna pick another tool that is extremely useful, and I think it might be like the second most useful one for this tutorial, and the only one you have to worry about or you can use a lot is the move tool. And to access the move tool, you just press F2, M, and then V. And now I have the move tool. And just as the name implies, it'll move things. So when you move, you're more like pulling the geometry to where you want it to go. So you could argue that would have been a better use of it would have been better to use that instead of the standard tool that I used to create this shape, but I just wanted to show that the standard tool, sometimes you can use it for a lot of purposes. But here with the move tool, I can just move things in a much easier way, right? So the move tool even helps you like sculpt things a little bit. It's very useful to give something a nicer outline very quickly. So I think the little guy over here has a thicker bottom as it goes towards what it seems to be a tail in the back. And I'm not gonna worry about the tail right now, but even now I'm gonna try to start to show that there's something that's supposed to go there to the back, like that. And one thing to really notice here, and I wanted to make it very obvious, is that this is obviously starting to become not very ideal for sculpting, especially if you want to maintain a lot of freedom for your sculpting and your artistic intent later on. And this is like for me, it took me a while to really learn this, but now I'm a lot more aware. And basically what it means is this, like the first thing that you want to try in ZBrush as a beginner is you want to subdivide something and just go to town and start sculpting on it. Like for example, I could look at the top part here, and I can start to like create those wrinkles on his body, and I'm already feeling like, oh, this is pretty good. Like that's giving me the effect that I want. But if I don't do anything about this and I keep sculpting and I get to the tail part, you can see that when I try to sculpt detail there, it's not great. It's actually very ugly, and it looks wrong. And the reason is because there's an imbalance of geometry among the mesh itself. There's very little here around the tail, and there's a lot around here on the top, and you don't want that. You always want to maintain sort of a equal amount of geometry throughout your whole mesh. And I'm going to show you in a bit how you can even something like this that looks really ugly and doesn't seem very useful can actually still be quite useful, and you don't have to worry about redoing things or or starting over and trying a different way. And on this tutorial, I want to emphasize how much you can create with just this very basic thing where I'm going to stick to this box. I'm not going to change to anything else. And I'm just going to worry with the brushes and subdividing and other tools like Dynamesh and ZRemesher. That's basically all I'm going to focus on right now. But for now, I'm going to leave this part like this. As ugly as it seems, I'm going to leave it like this. And I'm going to, again, delete the higher subdivisions. And real quick, I want to create the rest of the pieces. And it's going to be done in a similar way than I did before, where I dropped the box, the cube, and then I kind of went from there. But here it'll get a little bit technical. If you're a super beginner, just follow along. It's pretty simple, and it'll be very useful for anybody to learn. But just it's not a complex process, but it might be like I'm gonna go jump over a few menus. So in order to create the rest of the shapes, I want to create more pieces that I can work with. And once you want to work with more pieces in ZBrush, you start to make this subtool thing grow. Basically, you're going to have a bunch of little subtools here, and each subtool will be your piece. And in order to add subtools to this, the way I do it is I just kind of like leave these there, and then I go back to cube. See how I'm in this cube 3D that I made. Actually, I can jump to the one that is already a polymesh 3D, this cube 3D. And you can see that it's floating there. It's already dropped in the world, if you will. So when I go back here to my original cube, the way to add the cube 3D _1, which is the sculptable one, I'm gonna go append, and then just look for it, and boom, there it is. So now I have another box in the world. And to access the new one, you just select it down here. And obviously I don't want it just sitting right there. I want this to be the head. So in order to move it, the best thing to do is not so much with the move tool. Maybe you would think that's the way, but no. You have to go out of draw mode. So you uncheck this draw box. Actually, scratch that. All you gotta do is select the move tool, and then you can move it, just like in any 3D program. So I'm gonna place it around where I think the head will be, which is somewhere around here. And if you go back to draw mode, then you're back to sculpting on it if you want it. And as you see, the mirror settings are maintained throughout the whole scene, so you don't have to worry about that again. So there's the head. And then to add the arms, I'm going to do the same thing, although there will be an extra step. And again, I go append, and I can select the same cube. I don't have to create a new cube or anything. You can just keep appending the same shape. ZBrush doesn't care. So I append a new cube, and as you can see, it drops a new cube. And again, I'm going to move it out of the way to where, oh, don't forget to select it, because like right now the head is still selected here. So select this new cube, and I move it out of the way, and I can scale it down, and I can even scale it on the y-axis to be a little bit more like an arm. And I can place it where I think it might be, somewhere around there. So what about the other arm, you would ask? Well, very easy. You go back to draw, and you go to C plugin, and there's a section called Subtool Master. And this Subtool Master has a ton of options, but for now I'm just going to worry about one. And the one I'm going to worry about for now is called Mirror. So mirror will basically mirror that subtool and create a duplicate of it, but that is mirrored on the other side, based on the axis that you pick. And here I'm just going to pick the Z axis, which is the most common one and is the default one. And I'm going to merge them into one subtool. Because that way I can use the power of the Symmetry tool and sculpt on one side, and everything I sculpt on one side is sculpted on the other side. So keeping them in one subtool lets you do that. So now I have my two arms, which are just boxes. And if I want to test out that the symmetry works, there it is. Works perfectly well. So same thing for the legs. Or in fact, if you wanted to skip the whole thing, you can actually just duplicate the arms at this stage where they're just boxes, doesn't really matter. You can just duplicate the subtool and then you move it. You go back to move. Oh, by the way, if your pivot point gets all out of whack like here, you can do this thing where you, first I like to unlock, which means that if you unlock, the pivot point moves freely from the geometry. Because if this is locked, whatever you do to this widget will move the geometry. And then I click this reset orientation. Oops. And basically it resets your pivot's orientation, and then you can center it and do whatever you want. But now it's a little bit better just for that box, and I can put it here where I think the legs might be. So right already you could say, hey, look at that, it's starting to become like a character almost. It's now like a Minecraft character, but still it's starting to take shape. And all I've been doing is adding boxes and creating some C tools and using remember the C plugin, Subtool Master, and then Mirror tool. And then I go back to draw, and now I can go here back to my head. You can increase the visible count of subtools here. I guess I only have 4, so 4, that's all I need. But if you added more, you can increase how many will be displayed here real quick. So I'm gonna go to the head now, and what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna only use the move tool for now, for as much as I can. I'm gonna try to just use move tool until the point where I need another tool, but you'll see that I can do a lot with just the move tool. So remember, F2 MV puts you in the move tool, and obviously smoothing will be very handy too. So I'm just gonna smooth out the box a little bit, and as you can see, like it's very strong because there's not a whole lot of geometry there yet. And move tool, and I'm just gonna try to start pushing around these shapes until the head starts to look a little bit like what I see there in the photograph. And even though it's a photograph, I want to make sure that it could be a drawing, like, you know, and I don't have more angles. I don't have angles of the back. I don't have more angles. So like, if that was a drawing, that's all you get. It could be a very surreal drawing, and you might get a weird angle, and you have to figure out the 3D-ness of the shape. So I'm gonna try to be as simple as possible, even maybe try to get some of the mouth detail there, and I'm not even concerned whether it looks pretty or not. This is a face where I want to be very almost like deliberate and not caring if it looks very pretty. I'm trying to occupy the space of the model. So I think that's okay for now. Now with the arms, same thing. Be careful with the smoothing because it can be really powerful. And I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna start pushing in and pushing out all these shapes. As you can see, like, this is kind of ugly right here. And it's because when you move things with the move tool, you have to understand that it's gonna pull vertices from everywhere. But even with that said, you can still sort of fix it around a little bit and smooth it and start to like refine your shape. So it's not too much to worry about. And of course, these arms aren't that short, so I'm gonna increase the size here of my cursor and try to pull this way, and then smooth again, and then move, and then keep going, and try to match that shape, and try to fix whatever you got maybe too thin or you got a little weird. Try to fix as much as you can, and there it is. I think that's good enough for now. I don't want to get too deep with it. Same with the legs here. I'm gonna try to do the exact same thing I've been doing, where I'm just gonna very roughly try to match what's going on there. The feet might get weird, but even that, we have a lot of geometry here that we can mess around with, and just even as like this looks really ugly, and topology wise it's terrible, but you're not a technical 3D artist here. You're just trying to sculpt, and I'm trying to show that the beginnings of any ZBrush sculpt can be super ugly, and perfection is definitely not recommended, almost until the very, 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 very end of your sculpting process. And there it is. It's starting to become more and more like the figure we want, and less like a Minecraft character. I'm gonna activate the perspective so it's a better idea of how the model would look like in reality, I guess. So yeah, you just keep pushing as you like. I haven't changed the tool. I'm just using push, and a little bit of smoothing, but mostly, I mean move. I'm sorry. I'm just moving, pushing verts, not caring about anything else. Yeah, looks good. Maybe I can even push the tail even more. So you go here, you select your original subtool, and you really go to town on that, and just smooth out and push and just mess around with it, even though it might not look great. But to me, that's getting closer and closer to what the toy looks like. I think the arms could use a little, could use some more pushing around here. Maybe it's a little bit fatter. I think I'm okay with how it's starting to look right here. This crease in the leg is definitely ugly, but you know, a lot of these things, again, with the moving and smoothing, you can do a ton to get a very rough shape very quickly into ZBrush. And again, I haven't sculpted anything really. I've just been pushing stuff around with the move tool and smoothing some stuff around. So I think this is a good spot to transition towards some sculpting, and I'm gonna go back to the torso piece, because that's like a good one that has some cases, some examples to show. And I'm gonna isolate it by pressing Shift, and here on the eyeball on the subtools, that isolates, or rather than isolating, that will only show the subtool that is selected in your subtool list. So there it is. And remember how I was telling you that stuff like this might get in the way in your sculpting. And when I was starting with ZBrush, I would do that mistake all the time. I would want to sculpt something real quick, and I would just start subdividing a model until I felt like there was enough geometry for me to sculpt nice details, and I would think that maybe this would be enough. Like, oh, look at this, it's starting to, like, I can sculpt. but then I would forget that some section of my model were lacking in the geometry to get some nice sculpting details in, like the back here. So what do you do then? Well, Zbrush now, well, for a while now, for some years now, has the ability to sort of like recreate your mesh based on changes that you might do, like this, me pulling the tail from that box, and even it will even fix some of this stuff where this is completely useless for sculpting. Even if you subdivide it a lot, you'll probably run into problems later in your sculpt. So, but nevertheless, even an ugly mesh like this, for me, it's useful. It doesn't matter to me in Zbrush because I can use this tool called Dynamesh. Well, this is one option, and so Dynamesh, I'm just gonna press a button, and as you can see, this previously very low polygon piece of geometry is now actually very dense in geometry. So even though it still has that faceted look, if I smooth it, you'll start to see that it's really not low polygon anymore, and there's like a lot of detail I can start sculpting here, like in the tail. So compared to before, the tail offered no room for sculpting. Even when I subdivided like 3-4 times, it was still bad. Well, with Dynamesh, now I can do it. But there's even a better way to go about doing things before using something like Dynamesh, and I'm gonna undo until it's back to where we were. And I'm gonna use this one called C-Remesher, and I'm later gonna go back to Dynamesh and I'll say why, but first I'm gonna stick to C-Remesher for a while, because what C-Remesher does, it kind of does the same thing, but the difference between C-Remesher and Dynamesh is that Dynamesh just reads the overall shape and almost creates an even mesh of topology throughout the whole thing. Like it doesn't even care about the direction of the topology or anything. It's almost like a very fine cheesecloth pattern that it sort of creates around your whole 3D object. But with C-Remesher will actually try to create quote-unquote sound geometry, like what you might actually sculpt, like not sculpt, but even model from like a 3D program or something like that. Like it's a little bit more topology centric, and I'll show why. And I'm gonna just leave it by default, and just to not worry about options, and I'm just gonna press a button and see what it does. And as you can see, like it's less geometry than before. It's still quite a bit for what we're doing right here, but it's definitely not the fine pattern of the Dynamesh. It's a little bit less fine, and it's a little bit more. The topology is trying to follow the shape of this thing a little bit closer, and even does things like this, where it's trying to create nice topology loops that follow the shape of your piece. Even though I'm gonna say right now that sometimes these topology loops are very bad, like they spiral, and they're not super useful for very technical purposes, but for sculpting purposes they're totally fine. It doesn't matter. But I'm gonna go lower. I don't want that many subdivisions just yet. I want to keep it pretty low poly for now still. So in order to do that, well, I'm gonna uncheck this adapt button, because the adapt is called, I mean, it basically is adaptive density. It tries to sort of really match your shape, and I'll be honest, I don't exactly know what it's doing, but I know that when I put it on, there's going to be more geometry created. So I'm going to uncheck it, and I'm going to lower the polygon count. I'm going to go pretty low, like 0.2. See what it does. See, like 0.2 it's much less geometry. So that's way better. I want to get to a point where it's actually maybe even a little bit lower than that. But see, like that 0.2 is way better for further sculpting than this. Even though it might almost be the same amount of geometry, this is way better because you can see there's way more geometry being created here around the tail area. And that's like a really good thing. This is bad. This is pretty good. And I think I'm gonna go slightly lower. Let's see how low I can get. I'm gonna go 0.15 and see what that does. It almost looks the same. I've learned that there gets to a point where it starts to almost generate the same amount of geometry, but you can half this. Like, let's say I'm happy with this, right? Let's say, like, sure, this is not great, but that's just the nature of the beast. Like, you always get stuff like this when you see remesh. You can smooth it out and, you know, it looks better, but there will always be some weirdness, but let's not worry about that for now. But from this, I can go half. And this will basically, like, once you put half, it doesn't care about the numbers. It just halves whatever amount of geometry points you have here. I guess points is what Zbrush calls it. I call it, where he says geometry topology, I might use 3. Forgive me for that, it's just bad habit, but it's just basically the points, the polygons, the amount of stuff you have to work with. So if I go half and I go see remesher, boom. Now, I personally almost doubt that it's exactly half, or maybe it is, but once you start to go really low, see remesher starts to show some of its faults, like all this kind of ugliness here, but that's fine. We're not going to be concerned with that kind of thing right now, and I'm actually going to go back to this. This is where I'm going to start for now. So now my torso is no longer this. It's now this, and I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna start sculpting on that. So I'm gonna uncheck the line fills so you can see how it looks like on the normal sculpting, and I'm gonna do the same thing I did before. I'm going to start pushing stuff around, trying to match what I see on the original drawing, but now with a new set of a brand new topology, a brand new topology in my model, one that actually allows me to work with the tail section a little bit better, and I can now start to really give it a nice shape. I'm going to smooth that out, and as you can see, I was not able to do that before, and I'm still working with something that is fairly low polygon, and that's why I wanted to emphasize at the beginning to always do as much as you can in at this stage where everything is very low poly. This is the stage where you should try to get most of your shapes in. You should try to not worry about the details and spend quite a bit just working with the main shapes, with the main silhouette of the toy, or I mean the drawing that you're converting into a 3D model. And I think I'm gonna be I think this is gonna be good enough even to take it to final for the body. I'm actually pretty happy with it, so I'm just gonna try to keep matching the shape a little bit more. Again, you have to use your imagination quite a bit because I only have that photograph, I only have that drawing, I don't have the other angles, so I'm just gonna have to kind of try to interpret a lot of stuff. But that's exactly what you're going to be doing a lot in Zbrush, especially if you're an artist, a 2D artist, or a painter, or somebody that mostly works with flat images and you're trying to generate 3D models with it. And even up to now, I've only been using the Move tool, and I've mostly been concerned with the shape. And I'm gonna do the whole Dynamesh, Zbrush thing for the legs as well, because we definitely don't want this stuff. We don't want stuff that looks like this. This is really bad. But I did it on purpose, and I'm gonna almost add a little bit more detail here with the shape, with this ugly model, just to keep showing that it doesn't really matter, and like you can do a lot even with very little here in ZBrush, and it'll get you pretty far. I think that's okay. That maybe this is a little bit better right here. The feet aren't that opened up. Yeah, this part right here is. I'm basically fighting the geometry, which is fine. This is just me being a little bit more torturous than I need to be, but it all pays off. So it's good to sometimes do stupid things like this, because they definitely pay off. It's like, because you're moving quickly, you're doing big things very quickly, because you're not concerned about sculpting or detailed geometry, which is a good thing. And I guess I'll go back to the zero mesher, and I'm going to zero mesh the legs. And again, I'm going to go to a pretty low number, maybe again, like maybe 0.15, around there. Zero mesher. Let's see what it does. And it's like, oh yeah, instantaneously I can tell, like, this is way better. I can definitely work with this now. Way more. But remember how I said that doing all those stupid things, me pulling those vertices and just working with that ugly geometry pays off? Well, this is what I meant. It actually, zero mesher will interpret kind of what you were trying to do with the previous iteration of your model, and it'll try to create much better topology based on that. So I am already feeling pretty happy with the shape of those legs. I think this is still, they still retain a little bit of the boxiness because the model came from a box. So you can start to kind of fix that and smooth out the remnants of those edges, and start to get much closer to the shapes that you really want for a more final look. And I kind of like that, and I'm gonna go back to the arms. Same thing, geometry, zero mesher, go to pretty low number, and there they are, the new arms, much nicer. Smooth them out. I'm not gonna worry too much. Actually, the arms are probably the simplest shape here. Oh, actually, this might be a good edge to smooth out as well, because it's still very boxy. So you can smooth out this edge from here. So that's feeling way better. Kind of thin, but that's stuff that we can fix with the sculpting, with a more detailed sculpting pass. And still, same thing for the head. So I select my head, zero mesher, go to a low number, again like 0.15 seems pretty good. And this is what it gives me, and I'm not gonna fight it, it's okay. And again, like, I'm not too worried about the small details now. And actually, it's funny, the ZBrush now has this silhouette display on the top left corner, which I'm looking at, and it kind of matches. I'm gonna use that to match even closer to what the model looks like. It might be a little bit tricky, but it's kind of a neat little feature. But anyway, actually the legs seem to be more like wide open, maybe like that. Yeah. That's okay. That works. So now I think we can start to sculpt this out a little bit. And actually, I'm going to start with the legs. I'm going to start with the legs because they seem to be, they give this creature a lot of personality, I think. I'm going to do a little bit more tweaking here with the shape. Granted, this is a toy. It's obvious that it's a toy, but again, I'm not, this is not a toy sculpting thing. This is more like a sculpt anything thing. I just thought this toy offered a lot of interesting things to work on. Anyway, so I'm on the legs. I'm gonna uncheck the line fill so we can see what we're doing. And I think I'm gonna subdivide. And I say that like cautiously because subdividing in Zbrush is like a drug. It's like you can overdo it and then you end up having problems. So the way I usually sculpt is I subdivide and sculpt a few times, maybe even just once, and then I usually zero mesh again from sort of a sculpt that is somewhat halfway there, because it serves the same purpose as not having topology that will later be lacking when you sculpt even higher detail. So I'm gonna show what that means. I'm gonna isolate the legs, and I'm going to go geometry, divide. I'm gonna try to fix some of the shapes here. A little bit. And again, I haven't used more tools. I'm gonna start using another tool right now that is very useful. But for now, it's only been move and smooth. And just to show that you can get to a pretty good point pretty quickly just by focusing on just doing that kind of editing on your model with just moving and pulling birds and not necessarily sculpting. Anyway, I think that's where I'm gonna leave it as far as move tool, because I'm gonna now move to another tool, and that tool is called DamStandard, which is, I think was created by somebody, and Pixelogic later incorporated it into Zbrush. And to access it, you press F2 and then VS. You're gonna be pressing that a lot. This is like one of the most useful tools. And what this tool does is it basically does the same thing as the standard tool, but it has a bit of a pinch to it. And that pinch is actually driven by this alpha right here. And what you'll see, I'm gonna subdivide again to have a little bit more like a sculpting area now, while still keeping it pretty low. I might just leave it at that. I'm not gonna subdivide any more than that. And I'm gonna show how the DamStandard tool here can help us, especially with an area like around the feet where the shapes aren't necessarily what we want. And basically I'm gonna gently use the DamStandard tool to kind of create that crevice that divides the foot with the rest of the leg. And then smooth. So it's almost like I'm still almost like not sculpting. I'm still just focused on shapes. And the other real useful thing about DamStandard, or especially any tool in Zbrush, is that if you press Alt, it will do the opposite. So if I press Alt, it basically will pull in that sharp way, just as by default it pushes. So by pulling, I can kind of, and I'm doing this pretty gently, I can kind of start creating those bulges that it has across the legs. And even though this looks a little bit like striated, right? Remember that you always have the smooth tool. And remember that what I'm doing now is not so much detail sculpting still, it's more like I'm still just shape sculpting. I'm still just trying to create the big shapes, the shapes that are the most obvious shapes. So I'm not too worried about detail just yet. And even here, you can see that this section right here sort of remains sort of square from the original model. And I can now go here and use the move tool and start to sort of improve that flow of the geometry there and make things a little bit more round. So now you can start to see how I'm starting to match those like bulges that the creature has across his legs or her legs, I don't know, by just using the Alt, DamStandard, and Smooth. And I can smooth this down here, smooth, smooth, smooth. I can do some moving. By the way, move tool and a small focal point. Okay, I'm gonna enlarge it. So here's my cursor with the focal point. You can see how I'm changing the size of the focal point with O. If you go with a small focal point and the move tool, it's very, very useful, because then you can move more precise. You can move things more precisely with more detail, with more finesse. And that starts to become very handy when you start to work at this level of the model, where you're trying to really get your sculpt to become the shapes that you want in the final version. And then again, DamStandard, push, and I would almost assume that this top section right here has the same sort of anatomical like bulginess that he has across the leg. Kind of almost looks like the Michelin Man or something from a certain point of view. And you know, like again, like you could spend a good amount of time at this level of subdivision. Like I'm not gonna go any higher any moment soon, and I'm gonna say it again, because if I start subdividing now and go higher, I might get too caught up in details and forget about the main shapes of my model, and you don't want to do that until the very end, because as you can see, I can still find places where I feel like the shape can be refined and improved. And even now at this point, let's say you're like, I could take this model right here with this topology, with this amount of points, and probably take it to final. Probably just keep working with the same model, just subdivide it more and keep working on it more and more and more. But there's a better strategy than that. And that's why I haven't subdivided again or gone any further or done anything else. Because what I'm gonna do next is actually I'm gonna now try to unhide everything else. And yeah, now I can see that it's starting to be closer to what I want. But even at this point, it's still not exactly perfect. So I can still tweak it, and I'm still not having to worry about messing with a lot of points, too dense of a geometry, and it's still somewhat manageable. And actually, I actually have subdivisions still, so I still can access a lower subdivision level, which lets me work with the model even easier. Because, like, remember that the less points you have, the more aggressive the smoothing is. So you can take that as an advantage. Because if I smooth here, like I'm smoothing as hard as I can on the tip of the foot on subdivision level 3. But on subdivision level 1, when I do that, look, boom, it almost like destroys it. So it's really good to keep your subdivisions for as long as you want, for as long as you can, I mean. or as you want. So I'm gonna keep working with this model, and maybe this should probably, yeah. And I'm gonna maybe try to flatten the foot a little bit, because like if this were actually a toy project, you would probably want to flatten it to the point where this creature could stand. So you can try to do that with the move tool as much as there are better tools to flatten things, but again, let's not worry about other tools. So far we've only covered standard, move, smooth, and DamStandard, and nothing else. And you can probably I can probably take this to final with only those tools. It's not the smartest thing to do, but just to show that you don't need to know every single detail with ZBrush to get something going real quick. So I think that's pretty good for now. And by the way, oh yes, I'm gonna go back to what I was saying earlier. This model at this stage could even go through another pass of it becoming C-remeshed. And this might be a little bit too much for somebody. Somebody might say, well, you can just keep going from here. But the reason why I'm gonna do it is because I've already sort of improved as much as I could the original topology of the original C-remesh model. But if I C-remesh again, it's gonna generate a new mesh that matches even closer this more advanced geometry. And that's a really good thing, because it's almost like you're improving with each one of these passes. You're improving your lowest subdivision model, and having a good lowest subdivision model is extremely useful in ZBrush. In fact, I used to take models up to a point where I don't care about lower subdivisions, and you can do that and just get models to a point where all you're worried about is sculpting high frequency detail and very detailed things. But now I always try to keep a lower subdivision, all the lower subdivisions, as many as I can, because they always help you edit the models in faster and easier ways than if you deleted them. So I'm gonna do that again. I'm gonna go C-remesher again. And you could say, oh, it's gonna destroy all this work that you did. It kind of will, but that's not a bad thing, because I haven't taken this to a point where it's like getting super detailed and super crazy as far as amount of work. So I can sacrifice the work, because it's not very arduous, and it's not like it's still in a rough state. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. So again, C-remesher, and I'm still gonna go for a pretty low. Let's see what happens at 0.15 again. That's actually pretty good. See, now I have a very low subdivision that is closer in shape to what the actual model is gonna be like. In fact, I could almost argue this would be good enough for a video game. It's still a little bit, it'll create these kind of things where technically they're not great. Like this kind of stuff is not great. The topology is not the best, but we're not trying to be technical artists right now. But I'm saying that even from a very technical point of view, which is kind of what you would throw in a video game, this would be okay in a pinch, you know. If it were up to me, I would do it. But even it's not ideal, but you could do it, and nobody would really, honestly, notice it too much. But anyway, and yes, I did lose some of the sculpting that I made, and in fact, I'm gonna try to go a little bit higher just to see if it can give us something that's slightly closer in shape, but still being pretty low. You know, something like this, maybe. Let's see. This is probably better, slightly better, but it's still becoming pretty high. But I think I'm gonna leave it at that. I think this is pretty good, because this is like, it's still very low poly. This will still be edited very easily, and now it's like very close to the shapes that I was getting. And that's what you do for the entire thing. Let's try to do some of that for the torso. So this is where we left the torso at. I'm gonna isolate it again by pressing Shift and pressing the eyeball here and on the subtool list. And that's good enough for being the most basic shape. I'm gonna subdivide it a little bit. So geometry divide, maybe like three total subdivisions. And again, F2 DS DamStandard tool, and start to get those wrinkles in. Get those little flabby wrinkles of this creature in. Or they're probably not flabby, it's probably like very hardened, like reptile-ish skin of some sort, you know, something like that. And I'm not trying to match it exactly, I'm just trying to show you guys, or anybody, how quickly you can get things going based on a reference picture or a reference model or a reference toy or whatever you might have that you want to recreate in ZBrush. Actually, this is I should probably go higher because this is creating this staircasey effect, and this might actually get in the way when I recreate my new, because I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna get it to a point where I like it and then do the zero measure thing again. So I'm actually gonna subdivide again because that might actually become a problem later, because it will actually try to replicate the staircasiness. So you want to stay away from the staircasiness as much as possible. So I'm gonna subdivide it again just to have it not be as staircasey there, and then do the same thing again. Again, I'm just using DamStandard, and I haven't messed even with the focal shift or anything. I'm just all default. I've just messed with the size and I guess the intensity I haven't messed with. I've left it at 33, which is the default intensity of DamStandard. And again, like I assume there's a tail, and I could easily try to find more images of this creature. It's called Gabura from Ultraman, where I can find more reference pictures, but this is assuming all you get, because sometimes you might get a client that gives you one picture from one angle and they're like, just turn this into a 3D model, and you're like, how? And you just have to just use your imagination. Just follow the same patterns, look at the motifs of the overall thing, and just kind of fill in the blanks. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm just sort of filling in the blanks, trying to imagine. Maybe it's got a bit of like a spinal thing or something. Here's where I'm just using my imagination, being very loose, because this is also meant to be fun. I don't want to. This is not. Let's get to the technical nitty-gritty. This is be loose, have fun, sculpt, just focus on the fun part kind of tutorial or demo or whatever. Let's bring up the rest of the model. I think he could be a little bit chubbier. I think the chest is probably wider. Guy maybe a little bit chubbier, something like that. I don't know. I'm back to the move tool, by the way. Move tool, super powerful. I use it all the time. Move stuff around. Yeah, coming along. Little Gabura or Gabura. Probably Gabura, with my guess the correct pronunciation. Who knows? That's good enough. And let's try to do the same thing. Let's try to do the zero measure thing again, just to get us a mesh that might be closer in shape and resemblance of this new version. Because what I think might happen with zero measure that will be good for us is it might be able to actually follow some of these lines in the topology. And that will be good because right now, the topology as it stands, it doesn't really follow those lines. It kind of goes what I was calling earlier the staircasiness of it. And hopefully zero measure will understand. And actually there's ways where you can kind of guide the zero measure to follow the topology that you want a little bit better, but I've gotten mixed results with that. I'm not going to worry about that for now. I'm just going to try to see if it can kind of know it by default, because sometimes it does. So let's see if it does. Let's see if it's able to understand those shapes a little bit. So let's go zero measure. What's the target count here? 0.25. Let's see what happens. Not great. And this is sometimes the problem with zero measure, especially this line right here is definitely not good. So let's undo that. But you can understand that it actually is, you can see that it kind of is interpreting it. You can kind of see that it's trying to find the line there. So maybe if I smooth this out a little bit, you can kind of almost force zero measure to maybe do something more that is closer to what you want. Maybe if I do something like this, let's see what happens. Equally ugly. Let's go a little bit higher, or actually let's hit adapt. Let's use the adapt function, which is a default function, and see if it adapts to geometry a little bit better. And nope, it did not. Let's see what happens if we go a little bit higher. That's actually not too bad, but it's a little bit higher than I would want. It looks like Slimer from the Ghostbusters. But it's actually, you know, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's a bit higher than what I want. But here's something you can do when you get to a point like this. I got to this point because the lower zero meshed versions were not great, and they were causing this weird loop, and I wasn't liking that. So I was trying to go. I had to go higher, and this is what it created. But here I can try to go half, and let's see what happens. Yeah, this is why I like zero measure so much, because I think I can work with this better. And again, what I'm trying to get to here, and you could almost argue the same thing as before, that, oh, you lost all that work that you did, all the sculpting. Well, I didn't really do that sculpting as a final. I wasn't trying to be final. I wasn't trying to be, I wasn't trying to get to that point. What I was trying to get to is a better shape that might result in a better zero mesh model later on, that then I can use that as my new low poly base. And I think I'm gonna leave it at this. Again, there are ways where you can kind of tell the zero measure where to go. I'm not gonna worry about that now, because this to me is good enough. And now this is my new base, and I can subdivide now, and the model has shapes that are a little bit closer to. See, now I don't have the staircasiness. Now when I go over these areas, the topology sort of follows those lines, and it doesn't staircase that much because it's actually trying to match that flow. And those are the principles that I really want to get across with this tutorial, where a lot of ZBrush people that go straight to the sculpting and they don't care about all of this stuff. But this stuff really is helpful if you pay attention to it, because it can make your life a lot easier as you keep adding detail and you keep sculpting and you keep adding things. again, the staircasiness has been lowered. I mean, you will still get some of it, but look, I'm working at a very low resolution here, and on the tail, it's gonna be perfect. The tail is never a problem because points like this always become very high polygon anyway, so I'm not worried about what happens around the tail. But even this line, look, this line right here is based on something that I sculpted before, and now it follows the topology. So I basically sculpted a little bit, enough to the point where I was happy, just so that it might yield better topology later on. Like, I think now this topology, I feel like it follows the bulges that it has, the flabby bits on its skin a little bit better. And now I can probably take this model to final and just sculpt with what I got. It's not perfect. I will say it's not perfect. You can get it even perfect, more perfect than perfect, or try better ways to go about doing this. But again, this is for people that just want to get in there pretty quick and get something good going real quick, and something that won't become a problem later. Because imagine if I was working with the original model with the pulled out vertices here that I was doing from the box. Like, a box got us here. Remember that. This was a box, and now it's this. And now the geometry is more sort of customized to this shape rather than a box. Before it was all coming from a box. Now this is all sort of coming from from something that looks like more like the torso of this Gabura guy. So there it is. There's a torso. Oops, what did I do? Oh, I increased the visual count. So now okay, I'm gonna tweak the body a little bit. He's maybe not as droopy as I made it here. But again, I'm gonna do those edits in the low poly, because it's easier to manipulate, unlike trying to push around the high poly iteration of this model. Like, I go to the lower because, like, if I go to the high, I mean, I can still do it, but it might mess with the details that I already sculpted, so it's better to keep it low. Actually, the head is kind of off as far as the shapes. It looks like it's way higher than here, almost like a hat. And the mouth is a lot more open like this. And again, right around being very rough on this, because it's gonna change. Remember, like, these are points where you want to be, where you don't care much about how perfect anything looks like. It's good. It's getting there. It's a very weird head, but that's what I like about this model. There's no anatomical match of anything that I know of that looks like this. So you're very free to almost do whatever you want. Kind of getting there. I'm gonna do another serum measure here just to kind of like improve this, get me a little bit more shape. See how we added some neck space there? I was starting to run out of neck space. Now I'm gonna subdivide the head. Maybe like this is good enough for now. And DamStandard, again, just been moving in DamStandard, nothing else. Try to get the placement for the eyes, because that will guide. I don't know if it's the eyes necessarily. Whatever is down there, it could be nostrils. but they look kind of like eyes to me. So right now I'm just trying to kind of find a little bit more detail on the head part, just so that I can kind of like move forward. It almost looks like he's wearing a scarf. Actually, DamStandard with Alt to pull out. Yeah, a little bit better. A little bit better. I'm gonna keep moving stuff. I might be able to do the zero measure at this point, just to see what happens. And yeah, as you can see, this new mesh, this low poly mesh here, even has that sort of scarf division happening, and it almost created very, not perfect, but something that almost resembles where the eyes would go. So I think I'm gonna stick to this version of the low poly. I think this might work. I think this low poly version might work. It's because you want to keep, like, you don't want to get too perfectionist with it, like, because I could go in with zero measure, trying different options, trying different things, but you know what, this works for me now because I can subdivide now. And look at that, I could totally take this head part to final with this topology. This is nice. The topology follows this scarf piece or main piece, whatever that is. I'm gonna call it a scarf, although it's obviously not a scarf. I can kind of, this is probably way too low still for the eye detail there, but I'm gonna keep trying to add detail here. It almost has this like weird, almost like dolphin-like head or something, I don't know. And then it has like kind of like these armory looking plates here at the top. I'm gonna keep it pretty rough. Definitely has some kind of indentation here on the side. Maybe add a little bit of detail for the mouth. Yeah. It's coming together. I think I should do the arms real quick, just so that we're not seeing this weird noodly Adventure Time arms. So let's go to the arms. The arms seem to be the easier because there are no fingers. He basically has a spike for a hand, which is perfect for us. I'm gonna subdivide it only once. And okay, I'm gonna choose another tool right now. Actually, I'm going to show two tools. I think this might be an opportunity to show off a couple of new tools. And remember, just been move and DamStandard. So new tool is going to be clay, which default clay, which I access by pressing F2, then C, then L. And what clay does, it basically, well, it's clay. It simulates you adding layers of clay onto something, as if you had like virtual clay and you're just adding layers to it. In reality, it kind of is pushing things out, and I think you can see the layering effect a lot better if you go to like a really high subdivision level, like some, I'm at like almost like 1,000,000 polygons right now, or 1,000,000 points, excuse me. And if I start doing the clay, you can really see that it's trying to simulate layers of clay. It's kind of an illusion because you're not adding layers of anything, you're just pushing out vertices, but it works like clay. I mean, that's exactly what it's trying to do. But when you're at a very low poly, where you cannot really see the subdivisions, the clay almost just seems to be doing what the move tool does, or almost what the DamStandard in reverse does, where you're just pulling verts out. But this is a lot less aggressive than DamStandard opposite brush, because DamStandard is, you could almost say it's very spiky. That's why every time I did it, I would smooth it out. With clay, it's almost like it's already kind of smooth. It's not very spiky. It's a lot more of a subtle build up. So you can use clay for this. See, I'm trying to bulge out that shoulder section. I'm gonna isolate the arms. Again, you just press shift and you press eyeball, so I can see it kind of like on the underside. And there's another thing another tool that you can use that might be useful for things like this, that is called Inflate, which basically inflates. And F2IN. And again, at a low polygon level, it almost seems to be doing the exact same thing as a clay buildup. And that's why I'm using it right now. But if I went very high subdivision, you can see that the Inflate will literally inflate your geometry. It's not like simulating layers of clay at all. It's very quite literally inflating the geometry based on the size of your cursor. So that's why right now what I'm doing it at a more lower subdivision setting, because I don't want it to necessarily look like I'm inflating it. I'm just trying to bulge out shapes. So I'm gonna do quite a bit of this and go back to clay. I'm gonna go back to clay and I'm gonna show why. Cool thing about clay is that, and I'm gonna go to a lower subdivision. I think 2. I'm gonna delete the higher and stay at 2. So I'm gonna try to simulate the layers of skin that are on the arm, and I'm gonna try to stick to the topology here of the geometry. I'm not gonna try to fight it. I'm gonna go with it, even though it might not be perfectly matched to the model picture. It doesn't matter. I can always go back to that and try to move. I can move those verts around. Right now, I'm just gonna try to like create the bulgy parts, and it looks like I can even count them 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. 1, 2, 3, almost like 4, 5, and then the spike. See, I have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 skin folds. And then I go to the underside. And now that I can almost already sketched out the skin folds, and see how I use the geometry to my advantage for the skin folds. And again, this is why keeping it low is so good. I'm not sculpting detail yet. I'm just using very low polygon stuff to guide me. And okay, here I'm using DamStandard again. And I'm totally working with this geometry, and I'm gonna stay with this model. This is what's cool about the arms. They're literally just a tube that ends in a spike, which is very 3D friendly. And I'm just gonna stick to this topology right here. I'm gonna use it to my advantage, because if there's something that as a 3D artist, even as a beginner 3D artist, that you should keep in mind, topology of your model. And by topology, I'm not exactly sure how you would define topology in a more technical or scientific way. The way I define it is the flow of the edges of your model, like the flow of the quads, or the flow, these lines, the flow of the mesh, because they call them meshes because it's like a net. It's like a mesh of points that create the surfaces of your model, and you want that topology to always sort of match what you're trying to do with the final look of your model. Yes, you can have horrible topology and go against the flow of the low polygon topology and subdivide the crap out of a model and come up with a semi-decent result. But it's always better to keep in mind that even in a program like Zbrush, which is meant to be sort of liberating you from the shackles of 3D software that keeps you in that sort of like polygon prison, it's still a great idea to keep good topology. And actually, like the more professional 3D artists are almost like crazy about, like, very, very perfectionist on having their final 3D topology be very, very clean and very nice, because it just helps with everything. It's like the foundation of your models. So this is fine with me. See, I haven't even gone higher than this subdivision. If I divide here a couple times, even let's say go to like the 5th subdivision level, where it almost starts to just look like clay. That just what we did, where we worked with the topology to help us define our shapes, will definitely come in handy. Will be very, very useful for us, because it'll let us sculpt nicer details. Like your details will flow. It might actually even help you with, like, if you were to like take that model into a game engine where you have to texture it and unwrap it, it will even help with that. It will even help with how your texture is composed, based on the UVs of the model. Let's go back to how everything is coming along. Yeah, it's starting to really become that new creature. I think I can even show this like this. Oh, the legs are at that level. With DamStandard, I'm just kind of adding some quick guiding lines here. And by the way, I took it really far too soon. That's probably not a good idea. You should stay around here, almost here for a bit. Actually, 3 is pretty good. So I'm gonna delete higher, because you can see that some of these shapes can still be tweaked out and refined a little bit more. Fix some of the roundness here and things like that. So I would encourage anybody to do not take your models to a sculpting, to that super high subdivision level count for a while. Like, stick to the low for a while. Stick to the low until you're 200% satisfied with the topology and the soundness of the low poly, how everything's going, like all the shapes, edit whatever remnants of squarish shapes are in the model. Just there's a lot that you can perfect at a lower subdivision, and I think it's extremely useful to stay there for a bit and to not get impatient and be like, oh, I want to sculpt details right away. It's really good to stay in the low for a while. And there's always an opportunity to like sculpt detail pretty quickly if you want. I think the head is at that level, and I'm gonna end this pretty quick soon, and I'm just gonna focus on the head for a bit, because I might use a couple new tools, maybe just one more, because I don't want to get too deep into it. Because this has been a tutorial for somebody to just jump into Zbrush real quick right away, no prior training, maybe even not ever have touched a 3D program, and that's why I want to stay within a very narrow parameter, but also take it to a point where I feel like it's a pretty good point. So I'm at this level, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subdivide a couple more times. And I think that's good enough. And I'm going to start with the eyeball section, which I feel like is the weirdest one and the strangest thing here. And I'm gonna go to DamStandard. So DamStandard by default will push. And that's what I just did. And remember that the zero measure created this sort of shape here around this section, the nose or the eyeball section, where it almost matches. That's great, because now that I'm at this level, it all kind of fits. Otherwise, whatever I would have there would be kind of weird. Like it would be pinching geometry in really weird, ugly ways that you don't want. So this was planned. The way this geometry flows was planned before, when I was working with a very low poly version of this. So now I already have like almost like a guideline there of how the eyeballs look like. And I'm not going for perfection, so forgive me if this doesn't look exactly like the creature, but I kind of like how this looks. It's starting to get that wacky look. It also looks like he has like almost like glasses, but not glasses, kind of like that, like metal inset glasses or something like that. So I'm gonna try to maybe simulate that somehow. And what I'm doing now is I'm just almost adding a hint of that being there, because I still might need more geometry to create that detail, but I'm still gonna try to add a hint of it. And also here it looks like we have some. I'm gonna lower the intensity of the DamStandard brush, and this is the first time I'm doing this. And the reason why, once you start to get to a higher subdivision, remember how originally I was showing that when you smooth things out that are a very low subdivision stage, it smooths out very aggressively, but the higher the subdivision goes, it smooths out like less and less aggressively. With DamStandard, it's similar. When it's very high density, you almost want to, it's kind of opposite, I guess, because when it's very high density, you almost want to lower when it's very high density model, polygon wise, you almost want to lower the strength of the brush or the intensity. And I found that 13 is like a perfect number. For some reason, I always land on 13. 13 seems to be like, at least for me, the perfect intensity in DamStandard as far as like starting to sculpt into a high density model, because it kind of lets you go like this. Like I'm not doing just one swoop. I'm doing careful swoops. I'm going carefully and slowly, like I'm kind of building up the crevice. I'm not going like boom, there's a crevice. I'm kind of like slowly creating it. I guess like this is where you really start to sculpt, and I'm being pretty gentle with the strength on the Wacom. I'm not pressing very hard, and as you can see, it gets me pretty far pretty quick. So I can kind of start creating these like Klingon forehead wrinkles. I love this creature. So weird. And some staircasiness here, but that's fine. That's fine. Smooth, DamStandard. Remember 13, the magic number. I don't know why. I'm always on 13 or higher. Like it seems to be anything lower or higher or anything in between just doesn't give me that perfect level of control. But it's probably different for everybody. So there's also like this weird like forehead plate that I think he has, and I'm gonna show off another tool when I try to get like more final here on this forehead section, and there's a part where I can't really see in the picture how the shape goes, but I think it might go something like this. It's very weird, like I can't tell, but that's okay, because we're trying to show that in case as an artist, you're gonna have to use your imagination for a lot of things. Even if this were my own drawing, let's say, I know it's a photo, but let's say I drew it. If I drew that, I would be like, well, I just drew that. What's on the other side? And if I'm turning it into a 3D model, I just have to kind of make it up, and I can make it up on the fly in the 3D model, and that's fine. And yeah, I'm doing some moving here still. See, like the move tool is useful at every stage of sculpting, high density, low density. You can always move things around. You can always keep perfecting your shapes. See how he matches a little bit? Now I can try to get even closer with the shape. Got a little squished here. That's fine. I don't know, I think I messed with something a little much. Okay, I like that. I'm gonna stay there for a bit. I think it has like kind of almost like a connector piece here between the eyes. Yeah. And maybe I'm gonna create the sort of like the mouth hole, I guess. And here it's mostly my interpretation, because there's no way to tell what's going on in that picture. But I'm assuming it might be something like this. Yeah, this is pretty good. So this is where we are. Again, only been using DamStandard 13. Also using the opposite DamStandard quite a bit. So like, see this like sharp line that I created? I created with the opposite DamStandard, which is holding Alt. I really like that, because it gives you such a nice sharp shape for something like that, where I can tell even at that tiny picture that there's a bit of a sharp shape there in the detail. And stuff like this I can fix with the move tool. See, the move tool always is helpful to keep fixing the volumes in your model. And remember that the lower subdivision you go, see this, look at the model at this stage. It's very, there's actually almost no room for any detail at all. But even here, it already has the topology of the eyeballs, and that came in handy quite a bit later on in the sculpting. If I hadn't gone through the steps of having the topology be closer to what the model will be like at the beginning, those eyeball holes would have been pretty ugly and messed up. But since I kind of try to get them a little, even this is somewhat close to that. Probably could be better than that, but that's where I left it at. It helps a lot. And remember, this was a box. Now it's very far from a box. I mean, you can kind of almost, you might be able to tell it, like maybe from this angle, you could kind of tell that it came from a box. But even here, if you wanted to round it out more, you can. And you know, like you couldn't really tell anymore that it came from a box necessarily. it's almost like its own brand new 3D model at this point. Oops. Let's smooth out some of this stuff. Yeah, there he is. I'm starting to like what I'm seeing. I think there's like these wrinkles seem to kind of create a layer here. I'm gonna push them out a little bit. Go a little bit lower. This shape isn't great. Just trying to improve the shape as much as I can. What if I subdivide a couple times? Too many. 5, smooth out some of this stuff. Yeah. So at this point, I think I can even, actually I might need one more, but see, like, if I go to like the 6th subdivision, I'm already working with 500,000 points, which is about 1 million triangles. So I think at this point, it would be safe to say that you're starting to do some fine detail work. And see, like in fine detail work with the DamStandard here, I can really, again, on the intensity at 13, I can very carefully start to give it that little outline it seems to have around the eyes or the nostrils or whatever those things are. And then I can smooth it out a little bit, fix it up a little bit. And then move, round them out with the move tool as much as you can. Kind of perfect that tool, kind of perfect the shape, I mean. And I guess it's needless to say that once you go detail mode, you start to have to become more and more careful about how you sculpt, and that's where the fun part begins. But once you're here, where you're like working with detail, then now you can spend hours and hours and hours like fixing and sculpting this model to death, and that's where the fun part is. But I want to emphasize that it took a few steps to get there, and it was always like good to keep in mind staying at the lower subdivision settings as much as possible, because that's what is going to allow you to have a better sculpting experience as you move forward. Yeah, I'm starting to get that little outline that he has. Maybe not 100% like in the picture, but again, this is not the point of this exercise, because this has been less than 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half of me working on this model. And if you look at the entire thing, shoot, even at this stage, I just went and subdivided the legs 2 times so that they look smoother, because I never took them any further than the Dynamesh. Even at this stage, if I had to turn this in tomorrow, I would be like, hey, you know, it's not bad. And it only took me an hour and a half to get there. And all I did was use boxes, use the move tool, use the DamStandard brush, and that's pretty much it. And some back and forth with Dynamesh. And what I'm going to do here real quick is I'm not even going to try to match the model 100%, but I can see that there are lines that go across this scarf section. So with the DamStandard, I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. And I just undid a couple times because I can probably be better at following the topology lines. So if you turn on the line fill, you can kind of try to, you can kind of work with the topology lines. Remember that the more you stick to the topology lines, the happier you will be as you sculpt. So I'm going to try to match it a little bit. But at this point of the sculpt, it probably wouldn't matter too much. So if you went a little bit off, like what I'm doing here, it's not the end of the world at this point. Always remember that right where you get to the middle, you have to remember that the symmetry always is a bit trickier right at the middle, because you have to follow that middle line as close as you can. I'm going to start with that line here in the back, right here, like that, and then just kind of go to town with the rest. And again, I'm not 100% matching the topology. That's fine. I think right now, as long as I stay not too far from it, it'll be okay. And the reason why I say that is because I feel like at this point of the sculpt, I'm not gonna go back and recreate the mesh again. I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm not gonna Dynamesh it again. I could, but I won't, because at that point, I feel like, at least for me, it might be kind of a waste of time. I feel like I've taken it pretty far already. So there are those lines. I'm gonna turn off the line fill now, and I have the lines that he has there. I'm gonna use the standard brush now, the default brush, and maybe try to, that is, gonna go lower to avoid that. That is easily avoided, but I don't wanna go there right now. Basically, with the standard and a lower subdivision, I can kind of really push out these lines a little bit more. Kind of like, I feel like they seem to bulge out a little bit more right where they meet the neck. So that's what I'm trying to do right now. And I'm gonna smooth out all the imperfections here in a bit. And the reason why, again, another benefit of still having all my subdivisions is that I can work with the lower subdivision levels, which allow me to smooth things out better, faster, and yeah, just you can do tweaks on the lower subdivision that reflect on the higher subdivision, that you can do a lot faster and more aggressively than you would be able to if you didn't have lower subdivision. Always smooth out a little bit. I kind of messed it up a little bit when I did that, but that's fine, because I'm still not sculpting to final. I think here would be a point where I would start to sculpt final. And at this point, I want to show this tool right now. So let's say I'm sculpting for final, and I want to really sharpen this like forehead spike detail that he has. So at this subdivision level, which is 6, which is 500,000 points, I'm gonna try to, with the DamStandard brush, try to delineate this detail a little bit better. I like smoothing out the bulges that the DamStandard brush creates when it pinches things around, which is one of its finest and greatest features. But sometimes I like to sculpt it, smooth it out so that it doesn't look as obvious like that. And then up here, so now you can really start to see how that detail up there is delineated. And again, just DamStandard. I guess the intensity right now is at 22. It's not the magic number, but 22 seems to be working for this pretty good. And yeah, I now have like pretty sharp detail. You could almost argue like almost hard surfacey like that came out of very loosely sculpting stuff. And here's a tool that I wanted to show off a little bit. And this is a tool that I love. It's called TrimDynamic. And what TrimDynamic does, I'm just going to show you in its like most rough and powerful usage. Boom. This is what it does. It kind of flattens out your model sort of based on the angle that you're looking at it in the viewport. Kind of like this, and this, and this. See, like, I have almost created a faceted, almost prism-like corner there using DamStandard by flattening out sections of the model, which is extremely cool and useful, especially if you want to make something like this even more sharp, you know, because you can kind of see there's some wobbliness here that might be able to be fixed with some standard tweaking with the standard brush, smooth out. You know, I'm kind of trying to fill in that blank, fill in that crevice that was created, make it a little bit more straight as far as the spike. But now I'm gonna come in here with the DamStandard, the TrimDynamic brush, and gently try to follow the side of this spike to even sharpen that edge and almost make it seem that it's a totally different material, a totally different type of detail as opposed to the rest of the model, which is very wobbly and very organic. This is now almost like something completely different. And I think the model itself, the creature itself, has like, it's almost like a horn on him. So it's cool to differentiate it. And it's not another model. It's still part of the same model. You got to be careful with DamStandard because I'm keeping the size as very close. Very close to the sections that I'm sculpting, because see, if I go too far, or if it's too big for it, it kind of starts to hit the sections where you might not want that. So you have to be pretty gentle and pretty careful with it. Only try to hit the areas that are the areas that you want to flatten out and kind of sharpen up. Sort of like this. And now when I look at it from here, from afar, it's like, oh yeah, like look at how nice that spike looks like. And it starts to really match what the toy is doing. So where are we at now? We're pretty much there. I mean, it's not 100%, but that's not the point of this. This is to show how far you can take something really quickly from a reference picture that might not be perfect, and you end up with something pretty good. And I mean, obviously, an hour and 45 minutes, which is about as much as I've been spending on this so far, is a pretty good start. I mean, this model could probably, I think 8 hours would take it to a extremely good place where it could almost be printable and final and perfect and ready to go, either for a game or a 3D print or something. But I think I'm gonna leave it here, 2 hours. I try to keep it as simple as I could. Remember the DamStandard brush, remember the Move brush, remember the clay brush, and the TrimDynamic brush. I personally almost exclusively only use those 4. I mean, look at this. There's like hundreds of brushes that you can pick. And obviously a lot of these are I've used them as well, and a lot of these are great for some things. Some of these are necessary for some things. I'm not trying to make this a thing where it's like all you need ever are 4 brushes. No, this is more of a look how far I can go with just 4 brushes, and also by starting with a box with the ZBrush cube 3D, I mean, not box, cube, whatever. Starting with the cube that is extremely ugly topology-wise, but I pushed it and pulled it. I moved vertices around. I C-remesh. I didn't Dynamesh anything in this tutorial, by the way. Dynamesh, I recommend using only for final sculpts. Whenever you're like at the final level of sculpting, I think Dynamesh can come in handy, but I recommend sticking to C-remesher base models, and from C-remesh base models, use those models, subdivide them, and take those models to becoming the final base model for your sculpt. And always, I cannot emphasize it enough, try to keep all your subdivisions. Any model, like if somebody gives you a model to work with and it's already subdivided a ton and it's already sculpted a ton, and you can't get the lower subdivisions back, because some models you can actually extract the lower subdivisions from them if they've been subdivided properly, but some models you can't. If they've been triangulated, you can't extract the subdivisions anymore. So they're extremely unwieldy to work with, and at that point it's recommended to completely recreate the topology. I mean, it's a whole other process that sucks. So that's why I always say, do everything you can and spend a good amount of time working with your lower subdivisions until you're pretty happy and the topology is working and your C-remeshed retopologized results are working, and then subdivide to a point where you can start sculpting and have fun. So that's not a very artistic thing to keep in mind. That's a little bit of a technical thing. That's a bit of a 3D thing. 3D knowledge to keep in mind. Good topology is great. And these are things that I've learned through time, because when I started, I would make those mistakes all the time. I would subdivide my model too quickly, too soon. I would sculpt high frequency details too soon, and then I would always have problems with editing because I no longer had my lower subdivisions, or my lower subdivisions were really bad, and I had problems when I tried to sculpt detail in some sections. So if you follow my methodology, I guess, you will rarely run into that. You will almost always have a pretty good base subdivision model. And if you were like, let's say you want to take this to the really next level, I guess I'll go over that real quick. If I wanted to take this to the really next level, right, and almost like take this sculpt to like a cinematic, excuse me, I've been clicking around. You should all actually do something where you take this, once I got it to this point in the sculpt where it's like actually very close, or very, getting very close to like a final sculpt. See, if I go to a lower subdivision on this one, you can see that the topology is no longer great, even for this model, because I kind of went over the lines. Remember I was saying, if you go through the lines of the topology, that's fine. But see, now I can kind of see the problems with that, right? Some of these lines are great. You can see how the lines that I sculpted match the topology of the model. But here, it got messed up. I didn't care. I probably should have cared, but I was trying to be free at that point. And honestly, you can kind of like get away with it if this is where you want to be. But if I were a true perfectionist and I wanted to take this to even a higher level of quality, I would probably go here to this subdivision setting, almost to the final, and then C-remesh from here and go to like a much higher. I'm gonna go like maybe 3. Let's see what happens. And I C-remesh this, and it's gonna take a little bit longer, obviously, because it's calculating more stuff, more geometry, more points. Man, and that did a terrible job. Okay, I'm gonna do this. This is a bit of a hack that might work. I'm gonna take this and make this a polymesh 3D, and by doing that, it now create a new model, which is in a different tool. So see how there's a new tool here with only one subtool, and it's just a head. Well, that's what happened when when I click this button, make polymesh 3D, and I go back to the other one, and all my pieces are here. But if I go back to the make polymesh 3D one that I did, there's just this. What basically this is it no longer has any information of the lower subdivisions. That this is probably my only a superstition of mine, that it might be a better job at doing the zero measure without the original information. Who knows? It might not. I don't know. Let's see what happens. I don't know. It's maybe slightly different. It's not perfect though. This is not perfect. So something that I said I wasn't gonna go over. I'm about to finish this. I'm probably not gonna do too much. I just wanna see if it works, because I've always had mixed results with this. So there's a tool here called, I think it might be this. No, not Topology. Let's see. Zero Measure Guide. So the Zero Measure Guides are meant to be things that you lay down like this, that are supposed to act as guides for zero measure as to how to lay the topology of the new model. So we'll see if this really works. Like I said, I've had mixed results with this. There's maybe something am I doing wrong, but I don't normally depend on this. I'm the kind of artist that I try to like not get too dependent with these kind of tools. I try to just figure it, like work with the simplest things that the program offers. Like, see how that is getting kind of weird? I don't know. It's trying to join the points. It does weird things, but this is a quick experiment. Let's see what happens. I might even do like a round thing and see if it actually cares about that. We'll see. We'll see what it does. It might do a great job. Who knows? Like I might be totally underestimating this tool. We'll see. I think that might be good. As far as guides, I don't think it should need more than this. Let's see what happens. Oh, I think there might be a button I have to check for the guides to be detected. Detect edges? I don't know. I'm not a master at using the zero measure guides. I normally just go back and forth until I get a pretty good result. Actually, this isn't too bad. See how it actually did create sort of a round topology here. So it does work. This is still not great. I still don't like this, but at least it's not as bad as before. That is for sure. It's not as bad as before. And if but see this right here, this kind of braided effect, this probably is not good. So like mixed results here, but for the most part, if I go back to the original, I think this would be pretty good as far as I could take this to final. Again, like I was saying, one more subdivision, you're at 1 million points. I think for getting something done real quick, with real simple techniques, that's all you really need. And again, you can take the zero measure process back and forth a few times and get a pretty perfect result. It's possible. But right now, this is as far as I'm gonna take this. So I hope that was useful. I'm pretty happy with this. In less than a couple hours, I got pretty far on recreating this Gabura guy. And I hope that this inspires anybody that is not a 3D artist, doesn't want to mess with programs like Maya, Blender, or 3D Studio Max, just wants to jump straight into ZBrush and create something quick and fun with very simple technical things to keep in mind, which are, again, I'm going to emphasize, are keeping your lower subdivision stages in your model and trying to get the best base low poly model that you can get that will become your sculpt later, and always keeping the low. That is, I cannot recommend keeping that enough. It'll make your life better. And that's pretty much it. Thank you if you watched this.